welcome to my channel, or welcome back. Today we are doing a simple day of sketching in my sketchbook, and I knew I would not be able to do all of the Peachtober prompts this year, but I still wanted to draw a little bit. If you've been following me on Instagram, you know I started out doing a daily drawing challenge this year. I did end up stopping that, and I haven't been drawing daily. I've just kind of been drawing as I can. We've been a little bit busier the last couple of months, so I didn't have time to make a detailed drawing every day. So for Peachtober, I decided I would just combine a few prompts. For this drawing, I am combining acorn, kite, slug, gingham, and poppy, which are the first 5 prompts. And the inspiration was basically just a little outdoor picnic scene with some cozy colors and trying to find ways to incorporate all 5 of those things. My main goal with this was just to have fun and spend a little bit of time creating and really just enjoy the process and not worry too much about how everything turned out. After I had everything sketched out, I lightly erased, as I usually do, and then I didn't know at first what materials I was going to use, but I ended up deciding on my Arrtx Acrylic Markers just because it has been a while since I used those. Before I started, I thought I would pick out some colors that I thought would look good together, and I sort of planned in my head what colors I was going to use for each area. This can definitely be helpful, especially if you have color swatches of all of these markers, to know if your colors will look good together or not. One of my biggest mistakes, I feel like, with these markers is I just pick them out randomly without planning ahead, and then I sometimes grab a new marker, and when I go to add it onto the page, it just doesn't blend well with the other colors that I was using. So I would definitely recommend making color swatches and then checking to see if the colors look like they'll be good together before you actually start drawing. So I recently got this eraser. It's just Staedtler from Michaels, and it was in a 2-pack. It had a kneaded eraser with it, which is what I actually wanted mostly, but I have lost all of my block normal erasers, so I figured I'd get the one that had one of each in it. But I don't know if I like this or not. I looked at the details on it and I thought it'd be fine, but I think it's a little bit softer than what I was looking for, so I'm still not sure if I like this or not, and I don't know that I want to carry it around in a bag because if you rub your hand against it, it just pebbles apart. It just kind of pebbles apart, and it's kind of gross. So I don't know that I want to have that in my bag. So anytime that I use these acrylic markers, I always forget that I should put the background in first. So I started drawing these flowers because I was excited to get started on them, but I definitely should have put the green background of the grass that would be behind them eventually first, because there's so little and there's so many details that I just was not able to work around and fill in the gaps like I normally would. Every once in a while I have a drawing like this one where drawing the plants first and then the background around it works fine, but these ones were way too tiny and it was not working out very well, so I definitely should have done that first. Most of the time it doesn't really make a huge difference. The main difference that it does make is if you are drawing the background first and then you fill in with the shape of whatever you're drawing. If the background's not quite the right shape, you can easily just draw over it since these are acrylic paint markers. So if there's any spots that the size or shape isn't quite what you're wanting, you can just kind of adjust it as you're drawing whatever the subject is. Anyway, for acorn, I just drew this little squirrel that is holding an acorn underneath the tree. I basically just wanted the tree to make it more interesting than just an acorn. I do really like the way that the squirrel turned out. I think he's pretty cute, but I think it would be cute to make a digital version of this as well, where you can kind of see the squirrel better and zoom in on him and have more detail, because it is hard to add a lot of detail when you are using these paint markers. With the picnic blanket and the picnic area, I didn't really have a plan in mind for what all I wanted to include, but I started to just kind of freehand some extra things after I got the blanket and the basket done. So I included some little plates, a few kinds of fruit, and then some cups and pitchers off to the side. I think out of all the little doodles I included in this part, my favorites were probably the red napkins, just because they added a little pop of color, and I was trying to pick things to add on the picnic that would bring in the colors from the other areas, so I think it really helped to spread out the red from the flowers a little bit more. And of course I used the purple from the slug to add some fruit and some oranges and strawberries as well. Next, I wanted to practice using these acrylic markers a little bit more, so I switched over to my sketchbook that I got from Walmart. I didn't really have a plan for this, I just decided to have a little bit of fun. It ended up turning into a underwater ocean marine life scenery sort of drawing, but I didn't know where I was going with this at any point in the process of making it, so it really just was kind of seeing how things turned out. And this is a little bit of an example of what I meant with not picking out colors beforehand. Some parts of it that worked fine, some parts of it that didn't, so again, I'd highly recommend checking your colors beforehand and kind of having an idea in your mind of what you want to use. But when I was doing these little weird corals, it made me realize that I don't use very much purple, and I actually really enjoyed that, so I should probably use purple a little bit more often. Since this one was more of a warm-up style sketch, I didn't have any references, and I didn't mind how it was turning out until I got to this point. I was going to make a fish, and then it looked a little bit weird, so I turned it into a dolphin, but it still looked weird. That's kind of where, for me, it started to not be what I was maybe thinking of, even though I wasn't planning to have it look like any certain thing, which doesn't even really seem to make sense. But overall, I like most of it. I just don't really like how that dolphin-ish thing turned out, and I probably should have actually had an example of something that I wanted to put there instead of just randomly making a dolphin-ish shape. So after I finished up this one, which was more of just kind of having fun and getting a little bit warmed up, I switched over to this, which is when I actually had something specific in mind. I wanted to make a little sea otter that was kind of like peeking out of the water and holding a little rock or a shell. And I wanted to include the underwater view and put some plants there because I have made some really fun plants using these markers before. You'll see in a minute that because they're a brush tip, you can just kind of squash the tip onto the page and it makes a really nice leaf shape. So I did have something in mind for him, but I did not really pick out my colors in advance. I had a general idea based on colors I had used already this day, but I did not have it completely planned out either. One of the harder parts for this piece was figuring out what colors I wanted to mix to make a sea otter sort of color, because they're a dark brown and then they also have light brown, but then they have white on their faces and chest, and depending on the individual otter they can have it on their stomach, on their feet a little bit. So I had to figure out what colors I wanted to mix and the order that I needed to do that in. One of the parts that I struggled with a little bit was I knew I wanted to use this dark brown for his shadows, but then I had to figure out how much fluff I wanted to add, and I wanted the shadows to be a little softened and smoothed out, so he needed to have some fluff, but I also wanted it to look kind of like he overall was a dark brown without it taking away all of the detail. So I just kind of went back and forth a few times on how much texture I wanted to add using the darkest marker, and then I ended up going back in with the white and using a little bit of that in the middle to add a little bit more blending. So this is the same color that I used for the blue seaweed on the other side, and it made me realize that I need to use this color a little bit more as well. So at first you can see me actually drawing the shapes of the leaves, and then here is when I just squished the marker tip onto the page and let it make the shape itself pretty much. You can adjust how large or small they are in the shapes a little bit depending on the pressure and the angle of how you squash it. One other thing I really enjoy about acrylic markers is that they are kind of opaque and you can layer them really well. Depending on the colors, you can just draw right over, which is what I do here, and you can still see the colors behind. So I did that on these plants because they are a little bit more of a green tone of the blue, and you'll still be able to see it through as like a shadow, so it kind of looks like they're underwater and they're a little bit farther away from you. I could not decide if I should do this to the otter or not because I have lighter colors, so I was thinking I could just use one of those lighter colors, but I was afraid that I would mess up the otter and I didn't want to do that, so I did a little like test page on the back page of my sketchbook. I used the same colors that I had used to draw him, and then I overlaid a couple different blues, and none of them turned out the way that I wanted. It just kind of looked a little weird, and I think it almost looked too watery and white. Like it didn't really look like it was blue over him, so I decided not to do that. It does make it look a little bit weird because he's the same color everywhere instead of having that like green or blue tint from the water, but I just didn't like the way that this turned out and decided to just leave him as he was. This color is one of my favorite colors for making underwater things like plants or bubbles or leaves or things like that, and I really enjoyed making these little plants and adding the bubbles to them. I think the bubbles really add a little bit of whimsy, and I didn't want it to feel too disconnected, so I also decided to add some rocks in the background in the same color as the rock that the little otter was holding, just so it kind of made sense and he had a little bit more of a world around him, just kind of to explain where he is instead of it just being in the middle of water with just nothing but sky, water, and plants. I also wanted to add a few other kinds of plants, so I picked out this light green. I'm not sure if it turned out quite how I was hoping that it would, and I'm not really sure what kind of plant this is supposed to be, but it did add a little bit more fluff and filled in that empty space a little bit. And then I just went and drew in the sky behind him. I thought I picked a marker that had a lot of ink left, but this one is kind of drying up a little bit, and I did try dipping it in water. It worked kind of, because it is acrylic paint, but it is a little bit more transparent than these are normally. But after that, I just went and added a little bit more texture and detail to these rocks in the background, just so they would be a little bit more interesting. And that was pretty much all for this day of just kind of chill sketching in a couple different sketchbooks and spending some more time using these supplies that I haven't used for a while. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you guys next time.